Thank you everyone for coming. We are here to talk about trends we're seeing in the year 2021 in terms of IT/OT hardware and equipment going into any GxP, clean room environments, and how to manage that and the proliferation of that, and still maintain all the quality and hygienic standards that you have in your facilities. We have our panel speakers here: Bryon Hayes of Grantek, we have Morgan Polen from IEST, and we have Neal Siegel from Siegel Tech Consulting. Unfortunately, Greg Highland had a client issue come up that he had to go take care of, and that sort of thing happens. We do have all the information he had. We will make sure all that content still gets presented. So if you would, Bryon, take us to the next slide. So really today's big idea, if you look at this picture, really what's wrong with this picture? If anyone has any thoughts or comments on what kind of sticks out to them, just type it in and let us know. We set this up because this really kind of gets right to the heart of what it is we want to talk about today, and what is really a growing trend and growing concern in our industry. But really what you have here are people all gowned up, suited up, ready to be in a GxP rated environment, and then using very ordinary equipment, cables, iPhones, laptops, monitors, etc. And it really makes it very difficult to manage all of the quality standards you have in a room. Bryon, advance. So what we want to go through today, kind of the learning objectives, just the trends you should be aware of in GxP environments in terms of all the IT/OT equipment we see advancing. What are some of the contamination threats caused by IT/OT equipment in these environments? How can you avoid contamination caused by this equipment in these environments? And then really, how do you write and create a plan to account for and be ready to adapt to the amount of equipment coming into these areas and not have any sort of contamination? The takeaways and the next steps, we'd love for everyone to have an understanding of steps for improving communication between all of the people within your organization that would be involved in this, because this involves IT, it involves quality, it involves operations, it involves engineering, and how everyone understands what everybody else is doing, and then some actionable steps everyone can take to mitigate some of these threats in any GxP environment. Next slide. So how to participate. We do have a panel here. Please understand, unlike panel discussions back in the old days, meaning a year ago, when we go to a live industry event and people would actually sit up front. We're doing the best we can considering the situation we're in. We have a nice platform demo for doing this. It's working pretty well. Everyone you're talking to is in a different city, and most of us are sitting at home, as you can probably imagine. We're going to do the best we can here on all of this. Speakers, why don't we just have each speaker, if you'd like to just take a second to introduce who you are. Why don't we start with, well, I think, Bryon, does everyone have that built into their slides? We can have each speaker do that as they come up. So the discussion points, as we said, what are the trends in IT/OT in clean room and GxP environments? What are the contamination threats caused by this equipment? What are the contamination avoidance strategies that can be used? And the last one, how do you put together a plan to do that? Bryon, if you'd advance. Next slide, Bryon. So here, just to make this all good for all of us, if we, like any class, if you can eliminate distractions, go back one, Bryon. You jumped ahead. Take some notes and put it in the chat window. We want to know what your questions are. We have a number of very talented speakers here with a lot of industry experience, every one of them, and especially collectively as a group. And ask the questions that you can while you're here. And then also we leave this, thinking about how we can take actions moving forward. Go ahead, Bryon. I think it's next slide and maybe your intro.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, my name is Bryon Hayes. I'm the Director of Life Sciences at Grantek. So over the last 20 years, I've been working in the life sciences industry, primarily in the areas of automation, controls, and information systems projects. Currently, with my role at Grantek now, I'm responsible for translating industry trends into actionable technical partnership opportunities, training plans, and growth strategies for my team. I'm involved with ISPE as well as the ISA, and trying to help the industry set direction and and help the manufacturers be better.
I'm Morgan Polen. I'm from the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology. I've been in the field of clean rooms for more than 35 years. And my role really is I fix clean rooms. I solve contamination problems in all industries that use clean rooms. But lately, I do a tremendous amount of work in the GxP, particularly the GMP, the manufacturing environments. And I'm on the board of the standards organization, ISO Technical Committee 209. I'm responsible for helping create international clean room standards and maintain those standards. And I've worked in facilities all over the world. Next slide. I represent the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology. IEST is the only organization that exclusively serves professionals responsible for design, test, evaluation, and reliability of products and systems. We're involved in the detection, measurement, and control of forms of contamination associated with resulting from manufacturing, biomedical, and industrial operation, science, engineering, technology conducted at the nanoscale with an emphasis on facilities that serve nanotechnology, research and development, life sciences, aerospace, defense, and so forth. Next.
Good afternoon. I'm Neal Siegel. I'm an independent consultant. My biography, I've worked for many years in the industry, about 35 now. I had 20 years at Abbott Laboratories in the diagnostics division. I was a level 1 scientist in the division. I worked as a process validation manager under consent decree in 1999 through about 2002. I have done many GMP audits. That's one of the things that I've been doing recently. I think in the last 8 years, I've done about 250 or 60 of them. I see an awful lot of things out there as a quality consultant. I'm also fixing, helping companies fix issues regarding the FDA, warning letters, consent decrees. I do a lot of risk management activities with companies, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of that today. Thank you.
Around talking around GxP, CGMPs, and some of the IT/OT trends we're seeing today. So first thing to note is GxP can obviously refer to many different things, definitely more than just the manufacturing space. We have good laboratory practices, good documentation practices, and others. But for the purposes of our discussion today, we're focusing on the spaces in which product, raw materials, and samples, those types of things are exposed to the environment. In the regulated pharmaceutical environment, the CGMPs, those are the regulations that define how manufacturing activities are going to ensure patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. And these, they establish the minimum threshold for, among other aspects, the cleanliness of the manufacturing space. Morgan, I wanted to ask you a question. Do you have any thoughts on where, in a GMP or GxP environment, those contamination hotspots might be the worst?
Yeah, absolutely. The areas, the hotspots we're seeing is instrumentation. In today's manufacturing world and development and all that, we see a lot of automation and a lot more use of software controls and things like that. So what we're seeing is that the sensors have to be placed, in strategic places, and they have to be compatible for the GxP environment, which means they need to be cleanable, they need to not shed contamination, and they need not to accumulate contamination. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan. So without going into too much detail on clean room design, we have two other gentlemen here who can speak to that. Pharmaceutical manufacturing takes place in a variety of grades of clean rooms, and the required grade is dependent on the manufacturing operation that's taking place. By definition, clean rooms aren't sterile. It's the level of the airborne particles that are being controlled. But that being said, The equipment and manufacturing processes are required to be clean and free of contaminants, such that the quality of the pharmaceutical products is not affected by the environment. As such, personnel entering clean rooms required to wear a degree of gowning to protect the environment from contamination, and equipment must be clean and made of non-shedding materials, must be designed so as not to entrain particles. The room must be kept clean for aseptic, or sorry, if it's aseptic process is happening, sterile. More and more, IT hardware is entering the GMP space. As companies embrace the digital transformation or Industry 4.0 or whatever, the term that they choose to refer to it, more devices are entering the manufacturing floor. HMIs, SCADA, and MES terminals, digital SOPs, EBRs, all of these require some degree of operator interaction with computerized equipment. And thus, PCs, thin clients, digital displays are frequently found in the clean room right alongside the equipment. As technology has matured as well, more and more mobile devices and wearables are entering the GMP space. Tablets and smart glasses can display SOPs, or they can verify the correct configuration of a piece of equipment. Fixed terminals are migrating to mobile trolleys. Biometric wristbands are being used for system authentication. And each of these technologies enables efficiencies, but also adds a degree of potential contamination risk. Neal, I have a question for you. What do you think is the acceptable and or unacceptable characteristics for designing a piece of computerized hardware for use in a GMP space?
One of the things I deal with a lot is cross-contamination in GMP. And it's sometimes things that you don't realize are there. So if everyone looks at their computer screen, for instance, as I'm thinking about this, dust collects all over the screen. There's static charge and everything. So we need to look at the computer or the hardware as something that can collect material that could contaminate the next batch or lot, or even collect things out of the air and concentrate them. So I would say one of the acceptable design considerations would be how to clean surfaces efficiently and which surfaces need to be cleaned. And then, of course, one of the design characteristics that would probably be unacceptable would be the cleaning itself could cause damage to the instrument. You would want to be able to clean with the appropriate level of sanitizer or cleaner for the clean room in your GxP environment without damaging the system. I hope that helps.
To Morgan. Morgan's going to talk a little bit about what he does.
Excellent, thank you. So let's advance the slide, please. So contamination control is a multidisciplined field of applied science, and it's something that I've worked in my entire career. And there's already a lot of disciplines, a lot of things, a lot of nuances that have to be considered. Contamination control, specifically in the GxP, is of the greatest concerns in clean rooms or controlled environments. Typically, these would be laboratories or factories where we're making or processing things. GxP clean rooms have additional concerns that we don't see in other types of clean rooms. I have the breadth of experience. I've worked in every single, next slide, please. I've worked in every single industry that utilizes clean rooms. And IT, IoT is part of all those clean rooms, but a semiconductor facility, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, it's a picture from Intel, is a lot different type of a clean room than we would see in a medical device, which is in the upper right-hand corner. And those clean rooms are different than, say, in hard drive manufacturing in the lower left-hand corner, and completely different types of facilities and operations as we see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Cleanroom in Pasadena, where they're working on the next Mars rover project. Oh, you jumped ahead one. So all these clean rooms have different concerns related to contamination, different ways to abate contamination. and they have a little bit different approaches. So the thing I'd like to say is just because something's considered cleanroom compatible, it may not be GxP or GMP cleanroom compatible because we have additional concerns above regular cleanrooms. I work on the international standards, the ISO 14644 series of standards. On the technical committee, and I participate in those standards processes. And we have to write the cleanroom standards for all industries that utilize cleanrooms, even ones that aren't mentioned here. That said, the GxP world, we have additional concerns that we have to take in consideration. Next slide, please. So, pharmaceutical products, medical products are processed in cleanrooms and controlled environments. The GMP regulations, the CGMP regulations, the guidance documents certainly do not provide enough information on the design, construction, testing, qualification, and performance monitoring of these cleanrooms. That's why U.S. and international GMPs, both the European Union, the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, the WHO, all reference ISO cleanroom and controlled environmental standards because there's a lot of information that isn't necessarily relayed to us by regulators. ISO cleanroom standards reference other documents such as IEST recommended practices. It's important to understand that in the 21st century, cleanrooms require a 21st century approach to design, controls, and monitoring. One of the things that the FDA is fond of saying is that that the C in CGMP means current, and systems and facilities that were state of the art just 10 or 20 years ago may not be suitable to today. Next slide, please. So here on the screen, I have a list of a variety of different cleanroom standards. These are what I consider the most basic standards that any facility should be looking at. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but there's an entire library of international cleanroom standards. And most people, when they talk about cleanroom standards, they're only really often thinking about ISO 14644 Part 1. Next slide, please. And often the discussion related to cleanrooms and controlled environments typically only goes as far as this table. And there certainly isn't enough information related to this table for anybody to do anything in cleanrooms other than to understand what is the maximum concentration allowable of non-viable particles in the air. And that certainly isn't enough information, isn't enough controls for us to design, operate, and maintain a cleanroom. Next slide, please. So it's really important that we understand not just the international cleanroom standards, but we need to also understand regulatory thinking, regulatory practices, GMP guidances, as well as best practices. So in the U.S., a lot of our decisions are based upon the FDA. But if we're making products that are going to be used overseas in other parts of the world, we also have to pay attention to international or local good manufacturing practices as well as expectations. I spent a lot of time all over the world, and the facilities that I'm in, the GMP facilities that I'm in say India or South Korea or Singapore, look a lot different than GMP facilities that we have here in the US, and they look different than facilities in China or South America. That said, we do have global standards, and we also do have regulations and expectations that we have to be mindful of. Next slide, please. So the thing about IT and OT is it's everywhere in the facilities. And I want to take a moment here to explain the difference between medical product cleanroom classification and cleanroom classification. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between a cleanroom class and a cleanroom grade. And they're not interchangeable. When we talk about cleanroom class, we're specifically referring to ISO 14644. And this standard specifies cleanroom class by airborne particle concentration, where GMP Annex 1 defines cleanroom by grades. And in the grades, they define the types of operations that can be performed based upon risk for those grades. And it also establishes particle concentration limits at specific particle sizes. So going back to the ISO cleanroom standards, these standards are generic for any industry. Once we start to get into the grade system, then we're setting specific expectations for both particle sizes of interest, for classifying, testing, and monitoring the room. And additionally, we're looking at microorganisms. And the limits for airborne particle concentrations are established for the at-rest and in operation. And again, we're providing more detail and more requirements for the facilities than we would get out of the normal ISO cleanroom standards. In addition to that, the grade system establishes limits for both airborne microorganisms on critical surfaces, and microorganisms on personnel. So that's a big difference between ISO class and grade system. And just to be clear, that it's impossible to have a Class A cleanroom or a Class B cleanroom or a Class C cleanroom, because we're mixing terms there, right? We can have a grade A, grade B, grade C, or grade D, or we may have an ISO Class 5 or an ISO Class 7 cleanroom. And the knowledge and understanding and the use of those terms is extremely important for us in these environments that we're talking about. Next slide, please.
Just toss in one of the questions that's come up.
Please.
I don't know. The word here was rules, but I think maybe it's all the different classes and things you're saying. Do the same rules for cleanliness apply in a laboratory environment as they do in a production area?
Well, it's in my view, as a contamination control professional, yes, I would say yes. However, it's important to understand is if the laboratory is in a classified laboratory, by that I mean, do you consider it a classified environment, a clean room or so forth? Do you have concerns with contamination? And that's going to be dependent upon the type of products that you're manufacturing and the type of facility. But as an overview, as an overall, again, my role is contamination control. I look as contamination, broadband, very holistically. So I would say the same rules apply, but in a laboratory environment, in say drug development or R&D, you're not going to be audited by a regulator. That said, contamination can affect your results. Hopefully that answers your question.
We'll see.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, what is suitable for a GMP cleanroom? And this is important to understand, because what's considered cleanroom compatible, and I have a case history I'm going to cover here in a few moments of the product that I worked on and developed where it was cleanroom compatible, but it wasn't GMP cleanroom compatible. So with that, I'd like to actually ask Neal, what are your thoughts around why contamination control is important to IT/OT?
I would say one of the issues with contamination control, people will somehow combine what we call cross-contamination of, for instance, chemicals with actually sanitization, that is removal of microbes or control of microbial contamination. So I think, as you could tell with current technology, we're touching, we're moving things around. If you have an area that may be contaminated with spores, and you walk into the clean room and then you're touching your computer controls and things like that, you want to be sure you have the correct controls, would be my thoughts. So I think we need to think of it in two things. One, the actual chemical products in a clean area, and also the microbial spores or actual organisms. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's, thank you for your answer. Yeah, one of the things you mentioned, spores. So a big factor in the GMP world is being able to sanitize and sterilize as appropriate. Spore-forming organisms such as fungus, are very difficult to kill. And so what we do typically in a GMP environment is we do everything we can to keep those things out. We don't want them in because they are difficult to kill, and we want to keep preventing them. So right here on the screen, I have a picture of the inside of an aseptic isolator. And if you look at the type of connectors here, I circled it. These certainly aren't connectors that are designed for the GMP environment. They can't be wiped down. In addition to that, you have a mess of wires. And I have some more pictures later on of this isolator I'll go over. But certainly this isolator wasn't designed, wasn't maintained for the type of products they were making. And this particular isolator was used for manufacturing and filling a drug device combination device. So taking a drug and combining it with the device, creating a drug device combination. And this particular facility got into trouble because their product was approved for manufacturing, but their manufacturing line wasn't approved. and that put them into a difficult position. The reason the manufacturing line wasn't approved is partially because of the pictures I have here. Next slide, please. So when we talk about equipment and things, there is no regulatory document or general GMP certification for equipment. For there's typically 4 ways we approach systems. When I say systems, that could be a portable device, an instrument. It could be something installed. Could be the manufacturing equipment itself. But important to understand, the system may not influence the product quality in any negative way. It must be easy to clean, and those are the 2 most important caveats that we're talking about. The system also must comply with applicable regulations, FDA, PICS, EU, WHO, EMEA, IEEE, so forth. And the system must be suitable for the purpose. It must be validated. And there's an entire talk you can have about validation, but it has to be suitable for what it is there to do. Next slide, please. So we talk about the system not influence a product in any negative way. There must be no negative interaction from the product contact surface and the product. It must not emit substances. It must not outgas. And it cannot absorb the components of the product. And there must be no chemical reaction to the surfaces. The surfaces shouldn't be discolored. And the system must be easy to clean. And this generally applicable sentence can be found in almost every GMP guidance in any country around the world, because behind it there are 2 objectives. All surfaces should be smooth. All surfaces must be easy to clean. Next slide, please.
Morgan, if I could toss in one question that's come in, I'm assuming
Please.
It falls under equipment. If I want to implement wearable technology, for example, smart glasses for remote support, what factors should I consider when choosing a technology option?
Well, one, I guess for something like a wearable device, one, can it be cleaned? Can it be cleaned? Can it be cleaned and sanitized suitably? So if we're in a sterile aseptic manufacturing environment, if it's wearable, now it has to be sterilizable, which means it either needs to be sterilizable via autoclave, dry heat, or VHP, or some type of suitable method where we can validate that it actually can be sterilized. Which means regardless, it has to have no ingress of contamination. And the fact that it's going to be worn on a person, for me, that raises a red flag depending on where we're going to wear it, how we're going to use it. Particularly in the most critical environment, aseptic operations, wearable devices are something that we have to be careful of, because what happens is the person's interaction with that can be a source or a path for contamination. Okay, continuing on. Spots which are hard to reach are an additional threat. I spend a lot of time in facilities. I spend hundreds of hours every year inside aseptic operations, and I'll see a lot of equipment, a lot of designs, and there'll be stuff that's really difficult to clean, and I have to flag that to my customers when we're doing the audit. Say, hey, you can't clean this. How can this be suitable for your type of operations? Dead spots, places in the system which aren't wetted by the cleaning agent and cannot be suitably flushed, or where the cleaning agent cannot reach it at all. These are really big threats for us. Next slide. We do the next slide. Okay, good, excellent. So, so EU GMP Annex 1, the draft Annex 1, which came out in 2020, January 2020 of last year, has a very important statement we need to consider. This represents the latest in regulatory thinking, but I believe the sentence here is really useful. In clean rooms, all exposed surfaces should be smooth, impervious, and unbroken in order to minimize the shedding or accumulation of particles or microorganisms, and to permit the repeated application of cleaning, disinfectant, and sporicidal agents where used. Right here, this is a picture of inside of a HEPA transfer cart in a vaccine manufacturing facility. This photograph was taken last month. They're trying to make vaccines and they have exposed wires. Next slide, please. Here's a little more information, or a little more detailed pictures of that aseptic isolator where they're making the drug device combination product here, and you can see you can't clean it. Now the customer's response to that, well, we can't really wipe everything down very well, but we hit it with vaporous hydrogen peroxide, therefore we sterilize it. And our response to them was, no, that's not suitable. And eventually the regulators found that out. If you can't wipe it down, if you can't clean it, you can't sterilize it, regardless if you're using a vapor phase or a gaseous phase contamination. Next slide. And this poor company, unfortunately, they can't make their product, and they have a real problem. So having the right materials to avoid the contamination, the right type of wipers, the right type of solutions. Your solutions, of course, have to be compatible with what it is you're wiping down. Next slide, please. Just here's an example of a monitoring system inside a sterile filling facility. It was like that when they were running their media fills. I made note of that and said, how can you possibly leave stuff like this? Next slide, please. So again, we have to think of your design. The maintenance of everything that we're doing needs to be suitable, to be easy to wipe down, to take repeated application of our cleaning solutions, have the appropriate cleaning solutions, and also that we have to make sure we take care of residue, because residual cleaning solutions can also be a source of contamination. Next slide, please. So I had a question for Bryon. So a lot of times people come up with IP65. We have IP65 designs. Is IP65, Bryon, is it suitable rating for a GxP environment?
Well, IP65 is actually the term that relates to the ingress protection. So basically protection of what's inside of the containment, from dust or liquids. It doesn't really speak to, what you were talking about, the cleanability of the device itself. So, it's, you would need something to be IP65 rated just to protect if there's electronics or computer equipment inside of it. But it's not to say that, hey, this thing can be cleaned and adequately enough to be used in a GxP space. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so here we have pictures of examples of computers in clean rooms. And, these are computers that are designed for clean rooms. Next slide, please. Next slide, go ahead. So U.S. and international GMPs require, so my final case history here is I worked for a company and I designed particle counters for over 20 years. I worked for a company that made particle counters. Next slide, please. And particle counters are required to be used continuously, particularly in aseptic operations. So the particle counters we designed were made for clean rooms, and here a picture of the ones on the left, but these were particle counters that went in electronics factories. These went into companies like Intel, Seagate, Western Digital, Samsung, and we have thousands of them installed in these facilities. But they don't wipe stuff down that often in these facilities. Typically when it goes in, and maybe on a monthly basis. In the GMP environment, we're continually wiping stuff down. So we've discovered that our equipment wasn't suitable, and we had to modify our design to give us something more robust, something that didn't allow for the ingress of any type of cleaning solutions and withstood the frequent applications of those. And with that, I would like to pass the baton on to Neal.
Hello. Thank you for that. That was very informative. Lots of information. I need my first slide. I think it's after this. There we go. So thanks for letting me be here today. And I know there are a lot of words on this slide, but one of the places I wanted to start, obviously you're able to read for yourself, is I wanted to find a good definition of IT/OT integration. And I found the references at the bottom, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of the important things. There are three main categories of this IT/OT convergence. One is process, and that covers workflow, and the IT and OT departments need to reform their process to accommodate each other. Software and data convergence. So the software and the data need to converge, and I would say one of the items I would bring up for anyone in the FDA regulated space would be 21 CFR Part 11, right? We need to be able to have data integrity, and we need to have data audits, audit trails available for audits eventually. So we need to have the software be able to maintain these records because they're they're required, and they can be required sometime in the future, 2, 3, 4 years later after they're created. So I think software and data convergence is a very key aspect. And then, of course, there's a physical convergence, and we've heard a lot of that already in the previous presentations. IT and OT do converge, and they converge within the computer systems that we're using. So again, I'll allow you to read this at leisure, but I just wanted to say I did find something I thought was a pretty reasonable definition of what we're talking about today. If you can provide the next slide, please. Okay, so no, next slide. There we go. So one of the things I wanted to present was I was asked to talk about how IT, OT, and the quality unit converge. And for the purposes of this presentation, now it converges in many ways, of course, but with information technology, I understand if you're thinking just in terms of writing the code and validating and verifying the code and then giving it to other people to use, you can see that there's a handoff of sorts. But I would propose that, in fact, there's more care and feeding of the information technology over the course of your product life, over the course of your use of the technology. So what I've written here is information technology has the responsibility of capturing, producing accurate data, maintaining electronic audit trails, we talked a little about that metadata, safeguarding and securing data and data systems, including uniquely identifying users. And that, of course, is a reference to part 11. And I think this is a point where I'd say to Bryon, you had some insight about trends that you're seeing, and I'm wondering if you've seen trends regarding data integrity factors and IT/OT.
Yeah, certainly. Data integrity is as important as the quality of the product, and one kind of leads into the other. So, and it's important in both, the like handwritten or physical data as much as it is electronic data. And like you had said, the 21 CFR Part 11 and audit trails, as well as individuals that are performing activities having unique authorization, unique accounts in every system. Those types of things are incredibly important. So as more types of devices and as more systems get implemented, those factors that you would implement for authorization for a computer, you'd have to have the same level of authentication in a tablet or in a or even a wearable device. So yeah, it's definitely utmost importance.
Good, thank you. So just now going to the middle column, operation technology. Operations has a lot of responsibility here, of course, and that's for maintaining and executing procedures for the safe and efficacious production of products. We've heard that already in this presentation. I'm sure many of you live this. And this includes cleaning, decontamination, sanitization, and in some cases, sterilization of equipment. Preventive maintenance and calibration programs are heavily invested. And I wanted to say that when we talk about cleaning, for FDA, I've worked with Health Canada, one needs to validate the method of cleaning, and validation of cleaning validation, let me put it that way, is very, very difficult to do. You need to show that everything works in terms of cleaning, the materials, that it's effective. You need to take swab samples, effluent samples, for instance. You have to figure out what we call MACO, the minimum acceptable carryover, and then you need to have your worst case examples. And worst case, that's always very difficult to identify, for the simple reason that worst case can be that you have a very toxic material that in very small amount can carry over from one preparation to the other, so it needs to be effectively cleaned. Or you can look at worst case regarding the type of cleaning agent. So if you're using some sort of a water insoluble material that can stick to your stainless steel, Think the petroleum, petrolatum. You need a very different way of cleaning that than if you have a salt solution that doesn't stick and is readily dissolvable in water. So I believe we heard one of the presenters say also what you need to look at is that your cleaning agent. If you use a detergent or some surfactant to be able to clean, part of cleaning validation is also to show that you don't have carryover of the cleaning agent into your next batch that's being run. There's a lot of, anyone who's participated in cleaning validation knows there's just a great deal of thought that needs to go into not just decontamination, but also the type of sanitization materials. A lot of people use 70% IPA. Well, that doesn't necessarily kill any spores, so you need to use a sporicide. And then you need to make sure, of course, those things don't carry over or react. So as you can imagine, operations has a very, very difficult role in this, but it all starts in terms of cleaning validation and the documentation of that. And then the quality unit under FDA or other the regulatory agencies, they have the responsibilities and authorities regarding safety, quality, identity, purity, potency of drug products, strength, another S in there, and medical devices, the same thing. So, and this extends from in-process manufacturing to storage of in-process components that need to be pulled off the shelf and assembled at a later date, and all the finished goods, the finished devices, the finished pharmaceuticals. They have the responsibility to accept or reject, and they can't do their job unless information technology and operations do their job and can provide them the records and the data and all the information to show that indeed everything has been manufactured in a safe and effective manner. And quality will also come in at multiple times, usually during the year, and audit systems to confirm conformance to regulations. So you don't just crank on through forever until there's a problem. You actually go and you audit systems from top to bottom in GMP situations to confirm that indeed your cleaning methodology is still correct. And that again gets to the C in current. We are always auditing and looking to make sure that we are current with everything that we're doing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as you can imagine, in order to do these types of integrations well, IT, OT, quality, we need conversations. And in my business of consulting, that's often very difficult to do because, and I'm sure everyone here has been there, if something goes wrong, the engineers point to the scientists point to the engineers, and you got to clear that out quick to say, look, it's one system, and we need to understand from each side what it is that's going on. And design, if you're in medical devices, design controls are very important, and what needs to be mixed into that is also risk management. So I would throw out ISO 14971 can be identified as, and it's something I talk to even my pharmaceutical customers, even though it's for medical devices, safety and hazard analysis, risk mitigation, identification of risks, how to minimize them, is something that one needs to practice. This is not something that we all understand. It's not something that we're sometimes not even well taught as we come up through science, but it is something that all of our expertise sitting down as a team to say, where is the risk? For those of you familiar with FMEAs, right? What you'll do is you'll look at a risk category, you'll look at how the risk might happen, you'll rate it with a risk priority number, and then you'll come up with some sort of mitigation. When you put the mitigation plan in place, then what you want to do is make sure that your mitigation plan for the risk didn't increase another risk or create another risk. So risk management becomes very, very important as part of IT, OT, and quality, sitting down and figuring out how we can make the system as safe and controlled as possible, control being the key word. So there are system design requirements, there are pharmaceutical design requirements. Do you have the right tank? Do you have the right mixers? We get into validation and qualification of equipment. So can your equipment have for those of you that are familiar with it, an installation qualification, an operational qualification, and then when you actually use the equipment once it's qualified, do you have a process validation, a product or performance process validation that shows all the equipment works to manufacture your product reliably, repeatedly and reliably. And of course, cleaning is part of that, because part of what you're going to do, like I mentioned before, it's cleaning validation, but you're going to want to make sure that all the parts disassemble, get cleaned, get put back together right, and then you want to have those procedures, and quality comes in and signs off on that for operations. And IT is in the background to a certain extent, capturing all the data that's going to be used. And like I say to some of my clients, you know, we do live in to a certain extent, the litigious society. You want to have all the records to show that if, God forbid, there is a contamination event with a product that you have, that it didn't happen in, you know, on your watch. So all of those records help you 2 years later when you have to go back and review batches to confirm everything about the cleaning, everything. So IT, you know, has to step up their quality, and operations have to be able to show that in fact they did everything right. They have all the data assembled. Everything was done according to procedures to reduce risk. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, so in this slide, part of the planning for IT/OT integration is a risk management process. And risk, of course, is the probability of something happen coupled with the severity of the thing happening. An example that I use is, you know, if you're driving your car and it snows, snow hitting the windshield is a risk, but it's not a big risk. But what you do is you mitigate that risk by putting in windshield wipers and windshield washer fluid, so you can keep your windshields clear. But if you didn't have any sort of mitigation and you had something like your defroster go out, then you would accumulate the snow on the windshield, and now you're in a completely separate realm for risk. You now risk getting to an accident because support systems haven't worked. So that's a practical example, but you would go through all the risk associated with your product, your process. With IT, is all the data being captured appropriately? Is it being stored properly? Can we retrieve it as needed? Can we act on it quickly? Are operations doing what they need to be doing? If they're depending on IT to, you know, provide some sort of the batch record, the instructions for the work order, is it always in the right format? Can it be entered? Is the data being entered appropriately and stored? And then those records go to quality for review to confirm that everything was going right. And all of that system, the systematic approach, needs to have some sort of risk management in place to just confirm that indeed risks are being mitigated. And actually, the first step is awareness. Are you aware of all the risks that could be occurring? And do you have a procedure for being able to add risk as they're identified later on and then mitigate against them? We can have the next slide, please. So very briefly, we're all aware of there are many ISO standards. There's the federal regulations, Part 820 to 11 for medical device and pharmaceuticals. There are many guidance documents. ICH Q9 is one for managing risk. So there's a lot of information available, and in the U.S. On the FDA website, many of the guidance documents are available. Certainly the ICH guidance document. So I would recommend you look there to see what the current thinking of the FDA is for various aspects of their regs. Next slide, please. So cleaning protocols, best practices, SOPs, employee training. These are all parts of your IT and OT integration. And we've already talked about cleaning validation, but there's the cleaning validation, you have your procedures, and then you have the documentation, the records. Yeah, next slide, please. And again, sorry about all the wordiness here. You can read it, but essentially, I wanted to ICH Q7, good manufacturing practice, guidance for active pharmaceutical ingredients. It has a whole section, and I relate this section to whether you're making just the active pharmaceutical ingredient or any pharmaceutical and even medical devices, what cleaning validation is about. I think this is an excellent reference, and I suggest people who are interested in understanding cleaning validation start here, and it gives a breakdown of what at least one regulatory authority expects. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, within the Q7, there's equipment cleaning and use record. Again, IT. Operations creates the record, IT stores and it has the tracking information for the record, the audit trail information, and then there's contamination control. We've heard about that. And I would say in all of the discussions we have, contamination control, the word control is what's important here. Do we have systems of control in place? The regulation is great, those are words, but how do we put it into practice? How do we actually control? And I think that brings up a question to Morgan. Is all the equipment in the production setting required to be qualified for use, to be under the control?
Yeah, I would say if it's in production, it needs to be qualified. It needs to be there. It needs to be suitable. It needs to be maintained, and it needs to be calibrated.
Yeah. Okay, next slide, and then I'll be done after this. So as a summary, again, the three areas: information, operational technology, and quality unit. So for information technology, all aspects of data generation, storage, retrieval, audit trail, security, and secure identification of users, that's their purview. This includes verification and validation activities for software, including the software development lifecycle. So all the things IT professionals do, they're doing because there's regulatory compliance that's required, and there's risk associated with that should be well understood. The operations, all aspects of validation, routine use, production activities and records, investigations, maintenance, and calibration, all of these create records. And in many facilities that I go to and I audit and I work with, these are all electronic today. There's less and less hard copy that's being maintained. And then the quality unit itself is involved in all aspects of conformance with regulations and approval of each design, validation, qualification, record generation, release activity, and investigation. And they're frankly the ones who, when the FDA knocks on the door, they have to go and interface with them and be sure that IT and OT are standing behind them in everything they've done. Thank you. I'm completed.
Okay, Bryon, thanks for advancing to the next slide. So really some next steps. If you'd like to have one of the consultants we've had today help you, they'd be happy to set up a 15 or maybe 30-minute consultation call with you, and happy to review what some next steps might be in things you're thinking in your organization. And we can certainly share the recommendations and Grantek's digital resources for threat mitigation in GxP environments. And we have all this ready to go. Just to do that, just email something to us. Just send it to info@grantek.com, and we can respond to it from there. And I don't know if this is better possibly for Neal or Morgan or even Bryon, but one more question did come in. I am planning on implementing MES next year. Are there cleanroom compliant keyboard options available? Jump in, whoever wants to jump in.
This is Neal. That's outside of my area of knowledge right now. I really haven't seen anything like that to date.
I mean, I've seen a couple of different types of solutions. One of them being a membrane style keyboard with the each individual key has a membrane that gets pressed. And I've also seen glass keyboards as being one of the more newer technologies that has arrived in terms of the GMP compliant keyboards. And I believe the glass keyboards actually work within the the touch technology is such that you could be wearing gloves and still be able to have the keyboards, the key presses be registered. And obviously with the membrane ones, it's more of a mechanical membrane motion, and it would work with gloves as well.
Great. And one came in, I think, Morgan, you had touched on this earlier. As mobile and wearable technology becomes more prevalent, what are the considerations that a pharmaceutical manufacturer must consider before allowing these devices into clean rooms? I know you had mentioned cleanability and sterilizing ability, if that's a word. How, if I were to rephrase the question, how does someone know that when they're looking at goggles or whatever wearable tech someone's considering? Do we still have you, Morgan? Are you on mute? Oh, maybe we have a connection issue there. Anyway, was that you, Morgan?
No, I'm sorry. It was Neal, just to jump in and cover a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not answering from. Oh, Morgan's here. Okay, never mind.
Seem to have been away. Yeah, so the material, whatever you pick, wearable technology, just go back to the keywords for a second. There's a plethora of clean room keyboards out there. You just need to make sure that the keyboard you get is GMP compatible. And by that, it means it's got to be, even though it may be rated cleanroom compatible, it needs to withstand whatever it is you're going to clean it with. The most common solution that's used all over the industry is 70% isopropyl alcohol, 30% water, preferably sterile. Has to be sterile and maintained sterile if that's your intent. But then you might find that you have to use a sporicide or a quad or another type of cleaner. The same is true with goggles, any wearable technology. It's got to withstand whatever it is you're going to clean it with. And that's not going to be one solution. It's typically going to be 2 or 3 types of solutions, because you're always going to have to have a sporicide and maybe additional cleaner besides isopropyl alcohol and water. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. Good. Unless there's another question, someone pop it in there. Otherwise, I think our time on Demio, we have 2 minutes left, so we're really have to wind this down. We will take any questions. Just send them into info@grantek.com, and you'll be sent a link to a recording of this later today if you wanted to replay it or share it with someone else. So again, to the panel members, Neal, Bryon, Morgan, thank you very much. And to everyone who attended and gave us 50 or 60 minutes of your time, thank you very much as well.